go. Okay. And we're going live. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to our Monday morning stream here. We have some lovely people with us today. And before we get into that, I just want to say thank you all for coming to this and being here. Really appreciate you attending. It really means a lot. If this is your first time, hang out in the chat, tell us what you think, ask questions. We like to be interactive in that way. And if you've been here before, thanks for always being here. We appreciate you. So real quick, I'm going to just give us a quick round of introductions here. I'm switching so that we can see everybody's lovely faces. We've got Barbara Frontera, we've got Kat Swatell and Tiani Jones. These are some of my favorite people in the world. And if you attended our Skills Liquidity stream the other week, we had this moment where, like, Barbara was in the chat, and we're like, we should have Barbara in here. Barbara should be helping us, and give her a heckle button, I think is what Kat said. Just like hit the buzzer. So I've got a buzzer set up. I'm gonna have to send you a link to that. But before we get into that, let's go around and get some introductions in. Barbara, could you go first? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what your relationship to Wardley mapping is in the Wardley mapping community?
I am by profession, a marketing consultant, by training both a marketing and management professional. And Wardley, I came to Wardley mapping sort of obliquely through knowing Kat, knowing Tiani, and then meeting you and knowing Jabe. And, for me, it's been one of those tools that helps me help clients visualize, because I am not a very visual person. I mean, for me, it's all about words. Tell me words, and I think about it. But I recognize how important the visualization is to a lot of people, and as a strategic thinking tool, I find it extremely helpful.
Fabulous. Kat, could you go next?
Sure. I am Kat Swatell. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I came to Wardley mapping because I couldn't take another quadrant of doom, I suppose. I feel like Wardley mapping is accessible to anyone, regardless of what kind of suit you're wearing or if you have an MBA or not. So that's kind of a big reason why I'm into it. Tiani?
Yeah. So I'm Tiani. My background is in engineering, and I've kind of worked in agile coaching, agile delivery and all kinds of things, and seen a lot. And because of that, I think I am really interested in systems and looking at connectedness. It's something I kind of look out for, something I tend to notice or get notions of from, it's just kind of like in my style. So anything to visualize and draw out and change the conversation from kind of local type optimization type conversations to what are we doing? Why are we here? Can we even do the things that we want to do given our current structure or whatever it is? That's what I think interests me about Wardley mapping, that intentional conversation. Like, I guess it's all about strategic intent. So that's what I like.
Awesome.
And how I've come to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially the conversations we've had over the last, I think it's been like a year and a half, something like that.
Like 2.
Oh,
now.
2 years. Yeah. I mean, it's always like really, I think so all of us have a little bit of a background, I should say, in helping other people in organizations. And so each of the perspectives that we bring, I think, is adds an interesting angle and flavor to these kinds of, like, how do we make sense of these problems? How do we tackle them in a meaningful way? How do we bring intention into intentionless systems or accidental systems? And yeah, that's something that always has stood out to me with Kat and Tiani. And what I'm excited about today is, as Bernie points out, Barbara's controlling the shot callers. So, Bernie, I love that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all a link to a Miro board. And I think what we could do is just kind of pick up where we left off from the skills liquidity conversation, because I think that seemed like a really vibrant conversation that was in motion. And I'll catch everyone else up here in chat up on how we got here and kind of what happened. So let's see here. We've got our Miro board, and off to the very far left is the Wardley map we made. So Tiani and Kat and I basically made a Wardley map of a likely consulting project. And the reason we were doing this was because we wanted to talk about skills. We wanted to talk about how to understand this idea of skills liquidity. And so we made this likely map. You got a middle manager who needs some perspective. And so in order to get that perspective, they depend on a maturity assessment. And in the process of getting ready to provide that maturity assessment, the consultant comes in, does some goal and problem scoping, and so on and so forth down the list of things. And like, you've got really specific skills like, how to use jobs to be done, how to guide a jobs to be done conversation, or how to do pairing, etc. And so what we did after we built the Wardley map is we kind of like took this scale from 0, having no idea how to do the thing or what it even is, to 3, I can create things in this space and everything in between, and basically self-assessed where each of us might stand in this hypothetical scenario. And so that's kind of what brought us to some of the takeaways. I think that Kat and Tiani provided us some interesting questions, and I think that led us to the buzzer, if you will. So Barbara, there's this lovely button over here, and if you'd like at any point, just wave your hand and I'll play the buzzer sound. Here's what it sounds like. Woof. So those of the stream could hear it. You probably couldn't hear it on the Zoom call, but yeah, like let's get into it a little bit. So Kat says some lovely things like skills aren't equal to roles, and I think that's obviously true, right? Like you have people coming into organizations and they have different skills that may or may not be aligned with the roles that they have in their organization. And part of this idea of skills liquidity is allocating the scarce skill sets last. And Kat, could you give us a little refresher on why that's so important? And maybe that'll help us kickstart this conversation.
Yeah, we want to allocate the scarce skill last. So what that means is usually when something comes in and it requires whatever that skill is, right, we immediately allocate it. But that's where we have the most scarcity. So we want to grow the number of people that have that skill. So we actually want to allocate from the most common skill to the least common skill, because that will give us more optionality to absorb what comes in. So the person with the scarce skill, we want to, if we can achieve this, we actually never want to actually allocate them, right? We want them to be completely available for unplanned, so that they can jump in and help out someone who's trying to do that, but it's like a stretch, right? So someone that says, I'm a 2 in that, we would give that work to them or to a pair or whatever, and then we would not allocate the person that's a 3 in that, and they would come in only for things that the rest of the team couldn't solve.
Awesome. That's a really helpful kind of recap. And if I'm looking back at our map, I mean, report writing, a pretty common skill. We're all rocket ships, if you will. We all can create things in this space. We all have our own unique styles in report writing. But then I look off to the left parts of the map and I see like maybe things start to get a little bit less certain. Like we've got fewer people with skills in, for example, using jobs to be done for the assessment, or with metrics and measurement. We've got one person who's like super awesome at that, but for example, in my case, I have no idea how to do that very well. So I'd have to learn a lot. So in a skills allocation scenario, like you would want to protect that rocket ship and kind of put people with I'm just gonna call people rocket ships now, I guess. But yeah, and remind us about the poo emoji. I feel like that's an important part of this too.
Yeah, really quick before the poo, for the metrics one, like that would actually be something that I would be looking out for, right? If you don't have like a spectrum of levels for a skill, if you just have the extremes, like you have experts and then you have people that know nothing, that is not good, right? Like you have a really lacking skills pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
I
is
ran into
something.
something interesting on. Oh yeah, just to add on that, there's something interesting I ran into is that there were some who had on a metrics thing I worked on. Some people had like good, like the new Tableau, so they could like slice data really well, but they didn't actually have much knowledge in like what are some of the principles or um, idea foundational ideas around measurement and metric and what to measure and how to and how many and who's the audience, like some of that kind of thinking. It was just like, I know Tableau. And then some of the people that had more of the like, here's how we're thinking about metrics and here's a way that we can go and and here's why we're doing, and kind of had brought some of that thinking together, didn't really have the Tableau skills. Then it was kind of like, how do you creating that right mix that in order to get this thing done. And I guess that kind of is the same as what Kat was saying. Those you could kind of maybe consider those as extremes. A lot of knowledge in one and not much knowledge in the other, and flip flop for the other group, but they have to do something that actually they co-create together in the same domain.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's like, I feel like that happens in a lot of places where you have, like anything where there's like an easy like sell, like here, just use this tool and you'll have everything figured out. And then there's a lot more like underlying skill that's required in order to use the tool effectively. I mean, I feel like that's a pattern that repeats itself ad nauseum. I'm sure like we've all seen different flavors of that in the work that we do. Like marketing is always a new acronym of the week, right? Oh, sorry, Barbara.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started, Ben. But one of the things that when I was looking at this map last week, one of the things that I run into a lot is there's also a political dimension to the allocation of skills within an organization. So I'm working on a project. I'm creating a new system for someone or a new process, and I just we've assembled a team, and the team is working on the process. And then suddenly, in the middle of this, they'll say, we have to pull your designer.
Ooh.
Because she's the best designer, and we promised client X the best designer. Now, the designers, for me at that point, it wasn't important that the designers were quote unquote the best or the not best. It was that the time invested in building this new process with her now had to be repeated with a new designer.
Yep.
And so the politics of allocation of scarce resources or skill sets within an organization is always sort of a current that runs under all of these things.
Yeah, and even less political circumstances like multitasking, just like fractional allocation, that kind of thing, where like one person isn't allowed to focus, like they're pulled in like 10 different directions all at once. Lots of ways this can become very problematic. Like we have our nice model of what the skills ought to be, but in practice it's just a lot more messy, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I say people are groups of skills, right? Like it is a skill set, because a lot of times what I see is that a team or a value stream will say, well, what's wrong? We haven't allocated that skill. It's completely unallocated. that skill, as if that skill doesn't reside in a human being, right? And so I'm like, sure, you don't have anything on your board right now or in your workflow that requires that skill. However, that person is still assigned to a bunch of things, or doing, like, they're the person that's on every single incident call, or they're putting out every single fire. So sure, you currently don't have anything on your board with that skill, but the human being is doing a bunch of different things. And we can get to a point where we can like reduce our reliance on skills. And I know, especially in an agile space, people are like, oh, tools bad, right? But part of the evolution of tools is that we do put the things that we know, right, to be like generally true, or a group of things that are often true, and we put them into tools, right? Like Tiani brought up Tableau. In Tableau, or even in Excel, which I know might enrage some people, there are things built into those tools, right? Like color blindness, that's a thing. And I work in the tech space where there's a bunch of dudes, and dudes are much more likely to be colorblind. So we have a lot of color blindness, and those tools select colors like by default that will be discernible. The difference will be discernible by people with common types of color blindness, right? And so like you can let that live in an expert forever, or you can kind of say, like, that's a thing that is generally true. It should live in the tool, and the experts, like Tiani said, should be there to say, like, what do we need to convey to the rest of the organization through this dashboard? What are the things worth measuring? If we measure this, we start to observe this, how will it change the behaviors in the organization, and things like that, that maybe are more difficult to put into a tool. So
I love that point so much, because one of the things I think about a lot is when we go too far with tools, like we create a tool that is perfectly dependable and it completely like replaces the expertise, and in a way that creates dependence but doesn't create skill. And so you have people unskillfully using a tool, and so the minute the tool breaks, it's like it's the trade-off, right? Like you suddenly are unable to do anything about it, because we basically spent years building dependence but not skills. And I think platforms kind of create that problem as an example of things. But I had this like this weird idea, like, what if we made a map of like there's the problem itself this example problem that we use of like a consulting project, but there's always the meta problem. Like there's the consulting project, and we're making the map about the consulting project to talk about skills liquidity. But then there's the meta problem of skills liquidity. Like, how does right skills, to quote Toril Iverson, like how do right skills become the focus? And so I was wondering if maybe we could make a map around that, because there's a lot of like really interesting stuff kind of coming up in the discussion right now. Like, who needs right skills? If you start from the assumption that we don't know what skills are in our organization, what would the basic capabilities be that you would have to build up in order to move more in a direction of understanding that? So apparently I'm struggling with Miro today, so I'm just going to go the old-fashioned way. Copy and paste. Okay, so I'm copying in a template here. I don't know if you all can find me to the right of the last map I mentioned.
Yeah.
Oops, someone's running away with my map.
You move. Did I move it?
It's all good. I locked it down. We're good. So why bother with skills liquidity? Like, for whom is skills liquidity a capability?
Now I'm questioning, is skills liquidity a capability? I guess you could say it is.
Barbara's like got her hand on the heckle button, I can tell.
I think there's this, for me, it's like about, you know, it's more about the recognition of skills liquidity, right? It's like recognizing where on my team skills might actually reside. Because this was something that came up for me when we were talking last week, and I think I put it in the chat. It's like, so many times I come into organizations and they're like, we need to hire these people. You know, you need to find us these kinds of skills. And then I sort of poke around in the organization and I'm like, well, they know how to do that. And they know how to do that. And they're like, yeah, but we need people that are like, you know, that are top notch. I'm like, they know how, they are good at this, and they know your organization and they understand your processes. So why aren't we, encouraging and nurturing those skills within the organization, even if they lie outside what you think of as the people who should have those skills? And that's like, for me, it's in many cases, it's about identifying the skills you need, but then seeing where those skills may already reside in your team or in your organization.
Yes. Yeah. That's such a good point. And
so then is this like leaders? Like, so if leaders, I'm thinking of like, Backhoff and Deming saying like how leaders' job is to kind of work on the system ultimately. So if that's the case, are they being served by skills liquidity, or is it more the mission, the project, the product? Is it the users ultimately of the end product? Like, how far do we take this? Since that's the question you started, like, this is what I'm thinking. And I'm like, yeah.
Tiani, you always make me think about things. Damn it.
Sorry.
I'm always like, I think I'm thinking. Now you've got me going. I'm sorry. I got to mute myself for a minute.
Did she just heckle herself?
I know, she did.
Oh no. Yeah. I can hear the words in my brain, like the most constrained resource in an organization being management attention. Now that like does assume a couple like paradigmatic things about managers being the ones working on the system, and Bernie like asks a question about like or actually I guess Mary Stevens mentioned like, is skills liquidity dependent on a culture of learning within the org? And like it gets really messy really fast about like all the assumptions that get baked into all this. It's like I have a lot of questions. So I think we have a lot of users. Bernie was wondering if the organization is the user of those skills, but I'm sitting here going, I don't know. I don't think organizations are people, but also, I guess there's case law that says otherwise. I don't know. Who's
organization have needs? I guess. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I think I have an unpopular opinion here that skills liquidity is not a thing, right? It is not a capability. It's just a way of describing skills that are in your organization. So you could say that you wish that this skill was more liquid, or you had greater optionality around whatever kinds of work, but I don't actually think that skills liquidity is a capability. I think it's just a way of describing capabilities and skills within your organization.
Why would that be
my first question too? Yeah.
Why would that be unpopular? I think that's what we were sort of circling around in our own weird ways.
So how do we frame? This is the kind of thing I think about with maps. Is like, okay, I've used the play metaphor a couple times, probably. Like, we're just trying to like put the right props on the stage, so that the audience can connect to the plot that we're trying to, like the improvised plot that we were trying to actually make happen, or create the conditions for. Like, what props are we going to need in a likely map in order to have a good conversation that ends up being about skills liquidity, but maybe isn't like trying to get into that like intellectual navel gazing of defining the essence of liquid skills or what have you. What do we need to start including in order to have a good conversation like one about skills liquidity?
I think it depends. Here is the thing that I notice a lot that really changes how people approach skills liquidity type problems within their workflow. There are organizations. First, let me take a step back. So the work that we're doing, largely, I don't know who all of you are, but largely a lot of us are doing work in digital space, right? It's knowledge work. So it's not, and I know Tiani, you've worked in mining before, which is literally extraction, but a lot of the work that we're doing is not necessarily extractive in nature, right? It's more about like we're constructing something in a digital place. So we are trying to do something, achieve some outcome, not necessarily extract something, right? So extractive is aligned with power over. And in that scenario where we're organized in a way where we're trying to reproduce power over, then skills liquidity is like, I need to extract everything I can from these people, this organization, this team, whatever, right? And so we're trying to increase liquidity because we want to like perfectly tune the amount that we can extract from this labor force. Yes? Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense.
So you see some organizations or even value streams within organizations or whatever approach it in that way. And then the other way, because a lot of the things that we're doing are not necessarily extractive. They're more generative, like creating something brand new in digital space. So there is the possibility there that we are oriented towards an outcome, right? So we want power to achieve this or that, and we're trying to increase our optionality so that it makes it more likely that we achieve whatever we have the power to achieve, whatever that is. And we use our power with each other. So we're not actually trying to like maximize the extraction from any one individual person or any team. We're trying to increase the power with, right? And so that becomes a really different question of skills, because then we kind of did away with like, oh, how do I get the most out of each of these people? And we're saying, how do we increase the likelihood that we achieve this goal? Which means that we might take different approaches to increasing the liquidity for certain skills.
Okay. That's okay. So I'm taking notes down below underneath the heckle button. And on the left,
That's
I have
ominous.
underneath the heckle button. I guess the heckle button's hidden by, there you go, above the heckle button. Power over, extraction. So skills liquidity in an extractive metaphor means you're extracting labor from people, and so the game is to maximize the optimal extraction.
How much can I extract from these people? And I want to do it at the cheapest price. And I want, right, because everything is about extraction and scarcity.
Okay.
Is that the Taylor?
So scarcity is power, right? So then once you are concentrated on like how much can I extract from people and teams, then what is rewarded? Extraction. So then it is actually in people's best interests to be a source of scarce skills. So that it becomes a really interesting set of problems there.
And Tiani, what were you saying? Did I hear Taylorism in there somewhere?
That just reminded me of the whole like people shoveling pig iron and providing optimal scoop and like carrot and stick So who shovels the most and who shovels the least, and what incentives and bonuses there are. And that's reminding me of that. But then what Kat's describing sounds a little bit different, because I mean, that seems like it was scientifically managed way of working if you have the right shovel and you're able-bodied kind of thing, or able to do that work, hold the shovel and do the work. But then what Kat's describing seems a little bit more towards like, if you have to have some kind of that doesn't seem scarce. Using that term like this, you want to have like you want to have skills that are scarce in that scenario that you were describing, just right.
Yeah, because you can't be replaced. So even like, I'm so happy, Tiani, that you brought that up, because where did Taylorism and scientific management, those kinds of things, where did they come from? They came from a place where we were, for the very first time, orienting work around socially constructed time, right? Yeah. So like clock time, right? It's industrial, so it doesn't care when the sun is rising or the sun is setting, where it's like agriculture and things like that. And, even like artisanal trades that were done in the home or close to, right? That's really dependent on place, time that is natural and it occurs with the place. And then once we shift to industrial ways of working, we have to adjust all people who are engaging in that work to a completely different time, right? It's a socially constructed time. That's completely different, right? Like that is completely different, completely different. And we're doing the same thing again now, right? Because now we have digitally, which is also socially constructed place. And that's where the work happens, is in a digital place. So we're doing the same thing again. And so we, in the socially constructed time that is still oriented around extracting things from the earth and from people, it makes sense to adjust people to socially constructed time, but keep them oriented around extraction and scarcity, because that was still what the work is, right? But now we have socially constructed time, socially constructed place, and the opportunity to have institutions and work that is more generative, right? There's still extraction because we need power but we can do generative types of work. So what I'm really interested in is, how do we kind of flip these questions? Instead of saying, how do we digitally reproduce ways of working and ways of managing skills that were aligned with an extractive paradigm? How do we exploit the opportunities that are presented by a digital paradigm? How do we, if we had the opportunity to use more power with and power to, how do we make that happen? How do we make that more likely?
Bernie used the words electric time versus acoustic time, and I'm not going to be able to unhear that, because now I'm going to have electric place and acoustic place. But this might actually, I don't know, this might actually be an appropriate way to use a 2x2, although I'm really bad at making them, so I'm going to do my best here. So there's like, gosh, digital place, digital time, and then there's analog.
Kat, I hope you're proud of yourself that you've reduced him to 2x2s. Look what you've done.
Look what you did. We started out complaining.
Ben is doing a 2x2. I hope you're proud of yourself. Look what we've done. But it's interesting, Kat, that you sort of talk about that, because over the last year, I've in some of the big companies I've worked with, I've watched the rise of the tools to recreate that Tayloristic workplace, right? Like I was on a job where every week I got an email telling me how many emails I'd sent, how many people I'd contacted over, the whatever the web client is, how many, and I didn't care, but the more junior people that I was working with were actually tormented by these emails, because it also, tried to put it in the context. Your peers sent this many emails, overall this many emails. And it was bizarre. But it was also, as you said, if you're trying to create a generative environment, that is the least likely way to enhance that.
Yeah, and that, what you pointed out, Barbara, is something that's really interesting to me, right? Like, who said the thing about like, how does science change or whatever? It's like old, just terrible dudes die or something. That's not the quote, but it's close to that.
God, I'm not going to want to hear that for the rest of the day, because it's everywhere I go. It's going to be, well, the old terrible dudes have to die.
But that's not actually it, right? Like in the work that we are doing, you do have, as people enter the industry, right, they progress through those levels of skill acquisition, in my experience, the way that is laid out by the Dreyfus model. And that's what my kind of measures of skills liquidity are, where the kind of first step in acquiring the skills is learning about rules, kind of context-free rules, right? So I don't think that these things will change just simply by new people entering the industry, because we are doing something entirely new, right? And the new people that enter the industry are kind of like, oh, okay, yes, this appeals to the rules that I had before. So I'm super disoriented by acquiring all of these new skills and being exposed to these new problems that I've never seen before. I'm going to latch on to this email that tells me how productive I am, right? Because you've been through how many years of school and training and all of these things that orient you towards that. That is familiar. So I think that it is up to those of us who are already in the industry, right? Like, we can't just be like, oh, gosh, things just are how they are. I have a lot of hope for the future. These bright kids, whatever. Like, no, each one of us has to be, if you would like to work in a more generative way, then you need to be invested in that change, just as what it is.
So help me kind of complete the kind of comparison, right? So we've got the scarcity based power over extractive metaphor, which is, I really want to explore like the digital versus analog, place versus time kind of journey story thing there, because I think that's like, that would be a really interesting thing to help with this. But then there's a shift from an extractive metaphor to something else, because there is not scarcity, supposedly, right? Like, so talk about the non-scarcity version of skills liquidity, and how does all this like kind of fit together again, so that we can start to see the beginnings of this in our organizations.
Beck and I kind of have this like running joke where I keep telling people that the ghost of Mary Parker Follett possessed him. And that's where XP came from, right? Because if we look at that, it would be extremely difficult to practice true XP, extreme programming, in a situation that's totally oriented towards power over, right? Like pairing and mobbing or ensemble programming, those things are basically giving individual productivity the finger, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, we are not at all concerned, like, it's not at all concerned, not mentioned, do not care about how productive individual people are, right? It's about, what do we have the power to do? What are we going to come together with each other and do together, right? And a lot of it is also about learning new things, right? Because it basically takes for granted that we will be doing something that is more generative, right? Where we are creating something rather than extracting something. So we have to be learning all the time. right?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
I think like, and then people are like, oh, I tried XP and it didn't work. Well, of course it didn't work. Like when they go on to describe the context, right? And it's like, yeah, it was really hard to do my 4-hour pairing session and also track my time in 15-minute increments. Or it was like, it was really hard for us to do ensemble programming and keep track of, we had to like, my favorite thing is when people are like, oh, we had to write a script to like just randomly assign tickets to people or something like that, right? Or like, I'm
Crazy.
like, cool, that is rad. But
Something you just said made me think. So, like in Westrom's typology of organization, so a generative organization's mission based. But that's what you
Yeah.
described is like, if it's not based on the individual, it's based on the mission, the problem to be solved. So we're getting together, putting our heads together to solve the problem. We're not thinking about who does what or who's over whom or that kind of thing. And then if you go into more, and definitely on the bureaucratic side, that's more the rules based. That's where the time tracking and all of those, like the red tape comes in. And it reminds me of I don't know if I mentioned this in the last week, but there was this team I was helping with that fan project, the new material for an engine fan blade. And the rocket scientist, like he's like 30 years of experience. And he said to me that, wow, what we've just been doing in this experiment of kind of like writing our hypothesis and then building something, actually building it and putting it in the lab, running it, and then figuring out, did it work? Okay, what's round 2 of our experiment? And then getting that feedback together, working together, getting the learnings, understanding our learnings, and then feeding that back into our next round. Because that's kind of like how we used to work 30 years ago. And then somewhere this red tape came in. And the red tape is where all these like rules and hierarchies and things came in that impeded the generative type of work, slowed it down at least. It still was happening, but it was slowed down. And who knows what the results could have been. The results could have been, innovation could have been, had that red tape not been become like come down over their shoulders and slowed everything down.
I think there was definitely backlash, right? So it's like, as generative ways of working became more possible, there was backlash, right? That how did the people in positions of power, when these organizations are really oriented towards power over, how did they get there? Well, they're really good at getting power over. So then when you see people who are more doing the work rather than managing the people doing the work, when they start to orient towards power too, even though the people in leadership positions might be espousing, yes, I want this outcome, right? Like they would have to make a huge shift in order for that to actually be, true and integrated fully with the way that they operate, because the way they got where they are, they've been always rewarded for seeking more power over. And I do think there have been inflection points that have kind of reoriented us back towards power over and extraction, like things with Google after 9/11 and it a big shift back towards extraction there. And, we've seen lots of things like that.
But it also creates a great deal of cognitive dissonance for the leaders in many cases, right? Because the power over outcome is the unacknowledged one. In other words, they've always been rewarded for seeking power over. They believe that they're looking for outcomes that would be generated by power too, but the dissonance comes in when they have to reconcile those two different outcomes.
Yeah, that's where I think we end up with descriptions of outcomes that are meaningless, right? Yeah. Like it's just like complete garbage. I want to increase revenue. Cool. Show me a company that wants to decrease revenue, right? Like, don't be evil. Okay. Are there a lot of companies running around that say, yes, I encourage you to be evil? Like, that's not a thing. if you can't say the opposite of it, then you should probably just throw it in the trash, because it's probably just something to make you feel better about yourself. And you're like internally trying to make peace with two things that stand in opposition. And so you just end up with this garbage statement that is not helpful for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, having worked under a variety of systems and been at some of those inflection points, it's interesting because sometimes I long for the day when we had bosses that were just like, do it because I said so and I want to get paid more. Because then, then the motivation was very clear to you. Now I go into organizations and they're like, we really want to create a nurturing environment for our employees and we want our customers to have this experience. But all of their actions are, based in that sort of extractive model that you talked about earlier and are the antithesis of their stated goals. But getting them to the point where they can see that, it creates that sort of, that's usually where I get fired. But it also creates that. I mean, that's usually when they're like, yeah, it's been great, see ya. But, getting them to that point where they can actually explore that for themselves is super difficult in many cases. And, part of it is that the generational shift of thinking that you are seeking these goals as opposed to the extractive version of capitalism that you were taught to despise, is, even though you're deeply rooted in it, is very difficult.
This is really interesting because it starts to like paint a very different picture. Like the map that I was going to make starting out this call like looks completely different.
We've been ignoring you in the map, Ben. We have to apologize. We've been like, let Ben do the map. And Kat, the other point I want to make, and this is really interesting, I have been in situations where I have had the skill that they are looking for, and I have not admitted it because I know that just means I'm going to have a second job for the same money. And so I'm always super careful about admitting what I know how to do, and because I don't want to I don't want a second job for the same money. Yeah. Which is how it often, actually plays out on when I was super junior. I was like, yeah, I'm not telling them jack shit because, I'll just push the paper and leave at the end of the day and go do my thing, because I just knew they were going to expect me to do that thing for not more money. Yeah. Or not more, not more recognition, because this was also a time when the girls, did a bunch of shit that they didn't get any credit for at all. Yeah. That makes Tiani's laughing at me. I have been referred to as the girl.
The girl? Yeah.
The girl knows how to do that. Sometimes I was the girl because I was the only woman in the organization. I'm like, the girl knows how to do that. And I'm like, no, the girl doesn't want to do that. Yeah. No. So yeah, that's a whole other political dynamic in all of this too, which is that, as I say, I was off taking classes and all sorts of things, but I'd never tell the people I worked for. I'd just go use that to go look for another job because I didn't want to have two jobs in the same organization.
Yeah, there's something there about like the rigidity of roles too that is really concerning. Yeah.
But that's again a power over extractive thing when we're really oriented towards that. The question that people ask is, who has this skill? Right? Who has this skill? I got to get it out of them. And then when we're more, power to, power with, we're asking, do we have this skill? Do we have this skill? Right? And that almost becomes just like a really fleeting question, because then we're like, okay, what do we need access to in order to achieve this? And there are tons of different ways that we could gain access, and we'll figure that out. But what do we need access to in order to achieve this?
Yeah, something you said about that is interesting, that I was thinking that the idea of what it means to have skill and knowledge becomes nuanced, because if you're working in the, you know, how can we achieve this? How can we solve this problem? Do we have this capability or knowledge in our system? When you ask the question like that, it's less about occupying a space. It's less rigid. And there's something else that you said that what it means. There's things that you may have done, interests that you may have, as individuals coming together that could collectively produce that thing in a way that you can't really like see it until you start down the road of trying to solve the problem. You know what I mean? Like, or maybe there's someone that's really good at learning something fast. So you don't actually know it right now, but there's someone who's able to read a technical document and get something, pull it out, and then draw a picture. And then someone else sees the picture and like, oh, I get that. And then together you've now gone down the road a few more steps to solving the problem in a way that you couldn't really predict that or say. But, you know, if you're thinking more on the, was it like the power two, the
Yeah,
like,
there we have a
skill
generative.
there, do this job. No, you're gonna generate not only you're gonna work together and generate outcomes, but you're going to like even the knowledge itself grows. It like it's not may not
Yeah.
even exist, but it grows. It like emerges somehow from the activity that you're doing as a collective group of people with different brain power, skills, experience, and all of that.
Yeah, you generate even the skills and knowledge that you need for making this new thing, right? So of course there has to be like known components in order for the higher order innovation. There you go, Ben.
Yes.
Mapping, boom. Yes,
There
but there comes a point, right, where we have to generate skills and knowledge together. Because it is something new. We're making something new. We're making it in a new way. We can't expect that we all just know innately or whatever how to do something that has never existed before or never been done before, right? That is just
that seems to be
no
the
sense.
essence of skills liquidity for me. Then, so like as more we talk about it, it's less about moving the skill and where it resides but more about generating the knowledge. I mean, tacit knowledge does exist in people, but the whole point is to work in a generative way such that it comes out. You're talking, you're like, oh yeah, this is thing I do, and oh, I know how to do that. I've done this something similar before, and maybe we can try this. You have these conversations together that you wouldn't have otherwise if you weren't working collectively. But it's more about the so yeah, there's tacit knowledge that comes out, and some of that may be in the form of a skill, or it's just like, you know, it's things you don't even realize that you know how to do. But it's more about the creation. I feel like the essence of skills liquidity in a way. More about, someone asked a question about a learning organization, a culture of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, where if you're really pushing it, that's where I think is the essence of this, where it really has value, or really comes to bear for me. What I think is the most interesting part about it anyway.
Yeah, that was.
And I just caveat.
You're going to.
I want to caveat all of this because we only have a few minutes left, and I need to get this out. So I'm gonna throw tons of shade here, and like I'm not saying everything these companies do is evil, and I know like perfectly fine people that work there, but if you are you're saying we're going to work in this brand new way, we're going to create something totally new, right? That is awesome. To what end, right? Like Google pioneered extracting human behavior as a commodity, right? So it's not even anymore like, oh, if the service is free, then, or if the product is free, then you're the product, right? Now it's if the service is free, you're the commodody, right? Like your life is being sucked out of you, like extracted out of you for nefarious reasons.
Right. And
so
but it's also that it's not only that the product is free, but that the competition for the product has been crushed.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a whole
Yeah,
bunch
there's
of
a
things
whole
there, but
yeah,
through behavioral surplus, organizations are extracting your behavior out of you. They're processing it and they're feeding it back to you to influence you to make decisions and even feel a certain way. Okay. And you might say, Kat's off her rocker at this point. No, I am not. Go look it up. Okay. So I know that, like, I've seen the bullshit Simon Sinek videos that are like, millennials need goldfish crackers and a purpose or whatever. So you can work at Facebook and say that your purpose is to connect people. If you're connecting Nazis in a brand new way, you're doing something wrong. Okay. Like, what is the ultimate purpose there? Why does that company exist? And these companies don't exist to not be evil. That is not a purpose. So you have to just bring more curiosity to your work. If you're doing something, oh my gosh, I'm doing this work in a totally new way and I'm creating something totally new, still, you could create something totally new that all it does is reproduce the existing power structures and, like, turn them up to 11. See how I threw that back to analog? Ba-boom.
Ba-boom.
Mic drop.
yeah. Okay, Kat,
Full
you
circle
are
there.
off your rocker, but not for this. I mean, this is not what makes you be off your rocker. But yeah, I mean, there is like this whole element of it, of us questioning, why we've acquired certain skills and to what end they're being used. I mean, you see with Timnit Gebru what happened at Google recently, and that should be chilling for people in our work. The idea that even questioning a particular part of the quote unquote ongoing mission can result in the kind of ostracization that they're trying to pull on her, and the gaslighting. And so, I think that is a really fundamental question about not just the skills that we bring to bear, but why we are acquiring those skills. And that's both an organizational and a personal question.
Yeah, you can't just be like, oh, I take such pride in my craft and then not care what you're crafting.
Yep.
If that's what you're doing, you are a completely unethical person.
Well, I mean, it's if you're saying I'm working here for the check, that's one thing. But if you're saying here because you think I'm benefiting humanity, that's a whole other question, right? Like that's the thing, is you can't fool yourself. Half the time I'm just in it for the check. I'm here for the check, and that's fine if I'm not fooling myself about why I'm doing it.
Yeah, and also, like, if you're aware of the consequences, right? Like that, to the extent that you're in it for the check and unaware of the consequences, that's like another, like, further removed level of, like, problematic. But like,
even that, I would say, how at this point are you unaware? Like at this point where it's always in the news, if you are unaware at this point, you're working in a tech space and you're unaware, that is because every day you are choosing to remain unaware every single day.
Practicing ignoring.
Yeah.
But boom.
It's a thing, Ben.
Yep.
Did we get a map out of this? We're just at 12. Did we get a map out of this?
Look, I only promised a map adjacent conversation. I didn't need a map. But
A few nodes there.
okay, I know we're at the top of the hour, and some of you may have to run to other meetings. The but on this sentence is, okay, now I'm sitting here going, like, is liquidity the right metaphor for what we're trying to describe in a generative paradigm? And
I think it is, because it's all about increasing optionality.
Okay.
Right?
Yep. Optionality. Yep.
Where's Chris Matz when we need him?
He should be here. Yes.
He should
Matz,
be here.
get
Chris,
him on the phone.
get Matz involved. It's only 6 o'clock. It's only 5 o'clock there. He's, go get him. I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him and say, you've got to come to our next thing. Yeah, because he would be all over this in terms of the optionalities that are both available in companies and that you can create for yourself within an organization. There's a lot to learn that has nothing to do with the skills liquidity that we're talking about, right, Kat? I mean, that's like the learning here is also bringing yourself into goodbye, Kat. I hope it's a good class.
Bye. Sorry. Yes, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not just about learning the skill, it's about learning the context.
Yep.
Bye, Tiani. Oh, okay. Well, if they're leaving, I'm going because nobody just wants to talk to me.
I want to talk to you. Oh my gosh. No, finish the thought though. Bye, Tiani.
Yeah.
So
like,
context.
you know, our skills context free. You know, I mean, if I acquire a certain skill, do I have to be aware of the context? And once I become aware of the context, can I ignore it? You know, if I'm a drone pilot, you know, I may go into it being unaware of the actual context, you know, because I learned to do this on a video game. But once I become a drone pilot and the context is legible to me or is apparent to me, do I have a duty to acknowledge the context and start thinking about where my skills lie within that context?
Well, you have the ability, not just the duty, but the ability to shape the way that your skills are used in that context. I think even within the extractive metaphor, that's true. There's I wonder if there's like a generative metaphor kind of hidden within the extractive metaphor, where it's like, even if you're in this horrible structure, one that, you know, is using your skill or wants to use your skills in horrible ways, i.e. any of us who are participating in capitalism, like there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. Yeah. Like there's that kind of thing going on here, but I mean, within it, you still have choice. You still have way more agency than, I don't know. I think we have way more agency than we're aware of most of the time about how we shape the way that our skills are used, and the focus on a mission as opposed to a maximization of our utility is kind of an interesting switch. And I want to make some maps about that now.
Yeah, but there's also that whole notion that, you know, as humans, as individuals, as consumers within a society, we often pick something to be the evil thing, like big tobacco. Big tobacco was terrible. Well, you know, all of the tactics that big tobacco used are still in use everywhere we go.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, it's not like big tobacco was the only problem, and that the things that they used in order to promulgate and propagate their product that we now know was very dangerous, it's still there. It's still the bedrock on which most large companies are built. You know, if you point to Facebook, for example, you know, what they're doing, you know, they're doing, and the big difference is they're doing it at scale. You know, it's not like a lot of those practices aren't widespread within the industry. It's just that their scale is so big that they can move the needle on things that we find disturbing. But the needle gets moved incrementally all day, every day.
Yep. And from a paradoxical lens, like one of the things that I think about is like overextension. And I think like when you try to scale something up like that, so like lobbying, for example, like big tobacco, lobbying, yay. But like this is an everyday behavior now. And to the extent that it is or is not like able to be associated with harmful things, or like to the ability to the sense that we're able to distinguish which of that lobbying is harmful and which of it isn't, it's like none of it's context free. It's all embedded. And so now one might think that like the benefit of Facebook scaling up a behavior like that is it makes it conspicuous, to borrow some cat words. And now we can have a conversation about it, and then maybe on the longer arc of years and years and years, we'll do something about it. But at least I hope. But nothing is context free.
See, this is why I keep saying that you and Kat should do a podcast, and they should be 4-hour episodes. Because I think we could really, like, you know, when you start to pull these threads, and you see this in mapping, right? I mean, you and I have talked about this. It's never just one map.
No.
You do a map and then it's like, but that unfortunately is one of the ways in which I see people, like the tool abuse, I call it, well, we're going to do a map and that's the map.
That's the map. Ta-da.
That's the map. We did the map, or we built the Kanban board in Jira, and now it sits as an artifact for all of time and space.
Right.
And
I mean,
so
you're lucky if you get to that particular kind of dysfunction right now.
Yeah, well,
chaos by default, and then you're lucky to get to that kind of dysfunction, and then like, okay, let's push beyond that. We're constantly updating, constantly mapping, constantly kanbaning or what have you, and not just like making a stale thing that just lives forever. And then,
well, I mean, one of the points of Wardley mapping is to root you in your present state, because and we've talked about this before, that everyone, and I can say with some certainty that all my clients are always focused on an ideal future state.
Gap thinking.
And this is like, gap thinking, we've talked about this in Cynefin, we talk about this in all of the knowledge work that we try to do. The problem is that in practice, we have to shift a mindset that is deeply rooted in not just the organizational culture, but also the compensation and incentive models that are baked in.
Yep.
Which Kat and I didn't even get into, and that's a conversation that somebody should just like put us in a room and let run. But
yeah,
that's a thing, and there's a lot of, when we come to this as consultants or as knowledge workers, all of these different contexts play. It's not just the context of how our product or skill is used in the marketplace, but also, the context of how the organization rewards us.
Yep. There's not to like beat this quote to death, but ask me how I'm measured and I'll tell you how I behave. And the trouble in a lot of ways, like if you are I think I messed up the use of that quote, but like just gonna gloss over that for a second. But like the way that I'm thinking about is like how much I'm getting compensated for my labor, and I'm going to frame my interaction in that way, I think. And what you were getting into a little bit with hiding the skills, I think too, is really interesting, because like you're creating opacity around what you can do, because that you're in an unjust system that will, in the extractive metaphor, try to basically, this is a high leverage play to get the same person that we've have doing X and Y to also do Z. And that's
and
in that model.
But it doesn't necessarily increase my value to the organization as an individual.
Right.
In other words, my value stream is dependent not just on that, but on a lot of other sort of biases and assumptions within the organization of my worth as a cog in the machine.
Yep. And also like how your time should be protected, or whether it should be protected.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, when you start to get into this, and the problem I see is that everybody thinks of this model that we're talking about as something from the past, and it's not, because I see the same behaviors now that I saw, we'll just say, decades ago.
Kat was saying like there's the resurgence, right? Like, and I think that's because there aren't distinct moments in time. It's not just like then and now. It's like the then is still thenning. We're still here, and it's still doing the things that it does. And the extent to which it's resurging has to do with the extent to which we're feeding it, I think.
Well, I mean, I was just reading about, we think of what we used to think of as a skill, right? Programming used to be a skill. And now it's been, I was reading about this new program that allows, outsourced gig workers to be measured by the keystroke. And, you're given keystroke targets.
That's wild.
And there's no, so it's not just about, it's, as Kat said, a lot of it is about how, a lot of the mindset that organizations bring to this is how can we commoditize these skill sets, even as they come on board and they're new and they're exciting and they're scarce. How can we commoditize them so that we can extract more value from them?
Okay. All right. So this is dangerous because we might accidentally talk for another hour. But,
yeah, I know. I was like, let's wrap this up.
But the thing that like really stands out to me as that like little punctuation mark at the end is like we've got our Wardley maps, right? We've got our lovely little like, Genesis custom built product commodity and so on. But like there's this implication that everything should always go to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's not true. Maybe some of the gameplays that we deploy as humans in purposeful organizations is recognizing when something is being commoditized and pushed to the right and it ought not be.
Yeah.
In fact, that's something that we want to combat. It's like keystroke measurement as a as a metric for skill. What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like, and please, if there is any audience stuff, please don't at me about being a socialist on Twitter. Okay.
You can at me instead. That's fine.
Yeah. At Ben, but yeah, there's a lot to think about. And, one of the things I value about the work that you do and the work that Kat does and Tiani as well, is that all we're asking is for people to think. And that is the skill that is in many organizations most illiquid.
There's a lot of reasons why.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why.
I don't think it's that people aren't thinking. It's just that they don't have the space to. They don't.
Well, they don't have the space to. They don't have
that,
and it's not rewarded. And it's and in many cases it's punished. Mm-hmm. And that's where the illiquidity comes in. Yeah. Is that you're thinking? I mean, I want to say that like we talked about heckling like a pro, and the thing that, I call it heckling, I have to go heckle these people, is because I was often the person in the room that would question an assumption.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was taken as though I was screaming bad things about their mother at a ball game. That was the perception, was that it was a personal attack. And I think or an attack on the organization. And it never was meant that way. It's always meant as Kat would say, as a generative exercise. Like, are we thinking about this the right way? Are we taking all of the factors into account? Not, hey, you suck. It's more like, I'm trying to make heckle more of a good word as opposed to a pejorative one.
A loving word.
I want to say a loving word. But that's like, it is one of those things. I mean, for many years I had a reputation as being very difficult to work with because I would ask those questions and no one wanted me to. And so, think about yourself, embrace your inner heckler.
Embrace your inner heckler.
Embrace your inner heckler. Tagline. Like, give a good definition of heckling and embrace your inner heckler when you're thinking about how you move through your organization and your work. That's my only point in all of this.
Yeah.
So there, I heckled you and I ruined your Wardley map.
No, by no means did you ruin anything. No, that was great. And I love, here we'll end with the lesson, right? Like, heckling can be taken as like a personal affront, but hey, when we use maps, suddenly we're heckling the map and then we're not heckling each other. And that's, then it becomes just love between us. So there we go. Yeah.
This has been great, Ben. Thank you so much for giving us the space to talk about this.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to do the closeout. I'm so grateful that you came here. You were the best. Thank you for heckling us all. And I'm going to do my little closeout here. For everyone here who's in the chat, thank you for coming here today. We really appreciate you being here. What I'll say is, if you want to follow these folks that you heard from today, one of the things you can do is you can jump into the description of this stream and you can find their handles in there. So give them a follow. Let them know how awesome a job they did, how wonderful and helpful that you appreciated their contributions today. If Barbara's laughing right now, so I'm just gonna. If you would like to see more of this, you can go to lwm.events. We run live streams. I'm trying to do it like twice a week. We'll see. You know, if you have a guest that you'd like to see, a perspective that hasn't been on here before, like let me know. Always bringing new people in. And then also we have workshops coming up. I have another one coming up in May. If you want to get an intensive Wardley mapping experience, you can also go to lwm.events to see our upcoming dates. So with that, I will say thank you all and goodbye. Go make maps. Go heckle people in a loving way.